that have captured the state, that have ultimately... This is the dilemma of the great Republic of South Africa. Now the lights are off.
Load shedding.
I'll hold my globe, and now we do it in stage 8 load shedding.
Okay, we're live.
Are you ready?
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Wide Awake podcast. Today, I have an absolutely incredible guest, as always, Mmusi Maimane. He is a family man, a businessman, the former leader of the DEA, and the current leader of Build One South Africa.
Yeah.
Welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And it's great to be here. Great to meet you. Looking forward to our conversation. Yeah.
Me too. And just to get straight into it, I mean, you grew up in Soweto. What was life like there growing up?
Soweto is my home. It's like, even though you might leave Soweto, but Soweto never leaves you. It's I had the most privileged upbringing. I grew up we lived it was an apartheid settlement, and in many ways we had the standard home like anybody else, 2 bedrooms, one little lounge and a kitchenette, and my parents worked. My mother was a cashier, and my father worked in a factory, and so you kind of had this outward migration in the morning of people going to work to search for work, and then to come back into this township. And I grew up playing football as a junior. I went to school in Dobsonville in Soweto, and so for me it gave me what apartheid meant for evil. There was dynamics in there, because in the 80s we were under state of emergency, so it wasn't abnormal for us as children to grow up seeing these army vans going around, but also the nature of violence that occurred in the township. But at the same time, as an upbringing, I loved the colorfulness of Soweto. I had all the bands like Stimela, bands like producers like Tapelo Komo used to frequent our home, artists, musicians. So Soweto has this beautiful tapestry of both hope and despair, both color and culture, and beautiful, beautiful place. I could not have asked for a better upbringing in my life.
And I mean, doing research on you, I saw your education and all the places you had been to. Who had the biggest impact on your education?
I mean, despite the master's programs, and I'm busy now with a PhD, I would say that probably the biggest impact was my primary school. I went to this Catholic primary school in Dobsonville. They believed during apartheid that black kids could learn, and invested in it. And I know it sounds like a startling idea, but the apartheid government actually wanted to produce this idea that said that black kids can't learn, black kids' brains are smaller than white kids. I mean, how sick a world that was. But this Catholic intervention said that, no, we can rewrite the script. And I had a Catholic nun, a woman called Sister Christina Mutlou, who profoundly made sure I was conscious about what was going around in the country, but serious about my education. So if it wasn't for that foundation, and it is true for every child in this country, if you don't deal with the first 1,000 days, you don't deal with primary school, I think it becomes harder subsequent. And I'm really grateful that primary school laid the best foundation I could get.
And because of the current system that's in place, and obviously from apartheid times, there's so many kids that aren't in school. You know, I mean, I go to places like the Cape Flats and in the townships, and I see kids just at home. You know, there's a big portion of them that are at school, but there's a huge portion that aren't as well.
Yeah.
How does that change?
Yeah, it's one of the ills of our society that for every 1 million kids who start a year, by the time you get to matric, half have dropped out through the system. And one of the things that we've got to do is, again, hark back to the first 1,000 days. You know, our kids, half of our citizens are living below the upper poverty line. We've got to ensure that every child is able to eat well in the first 1,000 days, but also participate in school. We've underplayed the role of ECD centers, and we've got to get back to those early childhood development centers. And I know it's harping on a subject, but why that's important is that your brain development is occurring there. What we feed the child becomes vital for their ability to sustain that. And then we know that once they enter into the primary school world, by the time they're 10, they need to have been able to read for meaning, deliver work, because that sets them up for a foundation of our long term, so that school doesn't become a burden in the second half, etc. I think there are other economic factors in high school when you come around to the fact that our young girls drop out because of their own, they miss a week of school every month because of biology. What an injustice that is. That's an easy thing to solve. And thirdly, it's about making sure that we build society. When I think about my own kids, for example, I don't live longer than 15 minutes away from where my kids go to school. Neither do I. It means that for their sports, I'm there as their father. It means that for their involvement in school, I'm there. And I think we've got to invite parents to get involved with school. One of the things that apartheid did successfully was to move parents away from their kids, some through migrant labor, but also through economic hardship, where people were working furthest away from places of home, which meant the education of kids couldn't be reinforced at home, and the ecosystem of education doesn't work. So we've got to ensure that when we think about education, we treat it well. We give it its appropriate value, both from primary school, high school, and university, but also make sure the best teachers are staying in schools. There's nothing worse than what we see at the moment, where some of the best teachers have to leave because when we don't pay them enough, and then others don't stay because the leadership is appointed by unions, and the unions are so powerful that the best teachers don't want to stay in that environment. We've got to reform. We've got to think about education like the biggest investment we can make, right? And I know in our budget it's indicated like that, but we've got to value our kids. Our kids are superstars. I know they're clever. I know they're better. And I know we've got to get behind them because I think they'll succeed.
I mean, I was doing a program. I was trying to do a program in, do you know Dunoon Township?
Yeah.
And
I've been there.
yeah, I mean, it's not far from here. And the kids there are so incredible.
Yeah.
And we were doing like a creative thing because I like to think I'm a creative guy, so I stick to my strengths.
Totally, yeah.
And I went into the classrooms to tell the kids, and there was like one teacher between like 50 kids. And then I went into the next classroom and there was like no teacher, and the other teacher was bouncing back and forth.
Yeah.
You know, it's really sad because the kids have so much potential. And someone like me, right? Like I never finished school. I was a kind of a troubled kid, and I struggled with academics. And I also had a drug problem, you know. But I have amazing parents that were able to support me during those times, and not all the kids there do.
Sure.
There's so much still to do, but how can, you know, when you go into power,
Yeah.
I mean, how would you change that? How would you put more teachers into classrooms? How would you get kids interested in learning and being creative?
Josh, you've said some things that are absolutely crucial there. The first is that regardless of how difficult your life was, your parents were there. Now, we dare never forget the fact that statistically speaking, kids who grow up with both parents only represent a third of children in this country. Which means even if you looked at the birth register today, more than half the kids that are being registered are registered to single mothers. Now, that puts pressure on a child in a way that I don't think we appreciate. But I think more than anything, I'm not saying that kids who come from single homes, etc., cannot succeed. Of course they can. But we've already put another obstacle in front of them that they have to overcome. Secondly, I think the conversation we're having about classroom sizes is a vital one, because I do think that what we've seen is that where there's involvement of the community in the school functions better. And so the first thing we've got to do is appoint the best leaders in schools. There was a report that was written about jobs for cash, which was commissioned by the Minister of Education, which indicated the fact that principal posts were being sold by union members for that. Now, you and I know the value of work. We know going to work, what it means. But we don't leave the company. We leave the manager. Teachers leave the principals, because if the principal is not good, the teachers don't feel motivated. And then as it pertains to classroom size, and I think in many communities, we've got to be able to put up charter schools that say to parents, you've got an option as to where you send your kid. We can give you some money. We can take established schools like Cure, like whatever in the private sector, partner them, get businesses to be involved so that actually we build schools of excellence that reduce numbers, get the best teachers, build the best infrastructure so that we bring about change. So why can't there be a type of Cure in Danune, etc., or whatever, or Redham? I don't care, whatever the schooling is, so that we can partner in with that. And then the last thing you said is, how do we help young people who make choices that are maybe less than ideal? Now, whether that choice is about taking drugs or falling pregnant or whatever the case might be, there's another ecosystem of society that must help us with that. It must be able to allow young people to find rehab centers, because a young person taking drugs isn't the problem. It's the person who sells the drugs to that young person who is a massive problem that we must deal with. Must help rehabilitate this young person so that they can get back into the system and succeed. And I'm grateful that when I look at your life, it gives me profound hope that here you are pursuing the story, telling it to an audience, landing on your feet. More young people can do that. More people can do that. All of us have made mistakes. I've made my fair share of mistakes. And in truth, the job I've got to do is make sure that making choices are not fatal for young people, that we can reintegrate them into the system. And so that's the hard work we've got to do. And so I think you need leadership in this country that says we value every individual in this country. We value them.
And I was going to get into this later, but now that we're kind of on the topic, when it comes to prison reform, when I was in active addiction, I've been clean now for over 3 years.
Well done, man.
And when I was in active addiction, I got arrested. And I was so terrified that I was going to get sent to prison, and we all know the prisons in South Africa are not good. And I think that the reoffending rate is roughly 90% from what I saw online, which is mind-boggling. I look at other places, like I think Norway has one of the best prison systems in the world, where they don't have bars on the walls. They have like supermarkets. It's actually crazy. And they have a reoffending rate of 20%. How can we change the prison system in South Africa so that when people do get in trouble, they don't become bigger criminals? They have a chance to be rehabilitated.
At some level, when it comes to the rights of a prisoner, and correctional services sometimes doesn't do in and of its name, what are we trying to correct here? Because the work of rehabilitation is fundamental, right? And so at some level, we need to be able to build bigger and better prisons, because half your dilemma is that you have this in-crowding of prisons all the way around. And that's about giving out licenses for people to be able to build private prisons. Secondly, as I think it's all the ecosystem issues that go into that, to say, can we educate better? Can we rehabilitate better? Can we separate the type of criminals that are there? And then furthermore, how do we fix the criminal justice system so that by the time you end up in prison, we know that actually there's a higher conviction rate? Because as things stand at the moment, the conviction rates are so low that sometimes you get people going through the thoroughfare of prison to come out because the evidence is poor, the criminal justice system doesn't convict easily. The job we've got to do is make sure that those who end up getting arrested, we've got the appropriate evidence by training the police as best as we can, working with the prosecuting authority to make sure that people are well prosecuted, their rights are protected. And then ultimately they end up in prison to do the time that is allocated to them with all the facilities that go in there. What the problem is in South Africa, most of the time, is that sometimes when people get arrested, you can't follow the chain so properly that by the time they're in prison, they're spending too much time awaiting trial in that space, that by the time they appear and have trial, the evidence is so damaged that they end up back in the street. So not only do they resent the system because now they've been awaiting trial, and some of them up to 300 days a year, that by the time they get back, there's an inbuilt anger that doesn't want to cooperate with the society. But the last overarching thing I want to say is South Africa suffers because we've all lost values. Societies work because of a values-based integration. So if you think about Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, etc., they have an inbuilt value system that then says, actually, crime is a conflict against those values. People don't just steal. There's a point upon which you can't police everything. There's a famous story, and many philosophers have written about this in a philosophy called building, which sits and infuses values into society and education, etc., so that I value you as a human being. Our problem is that sometimes people come, they rob someone, but they've lost the value of life. They've lost the value of Ubuntu. That I feel it's okay to rob you. I feel it's okay to rape a woman because a woman is less than. I feel it's okay for me to be racist, etc. These are things that undermine our value system, what sits within us, that says, I treat you as a fellow human being. You complete my humanity, and our interconnectedness is vital. So I do think we need to have a conversation about values, particularly in our education sector, in our society, because when we do that, we can police the things in an era of protection or prevention rather than eventually saying, how do we prosecute those things?
I work with a lot of gang members, and they seem to talk about murder like it's normal.
Yeah.
You know, there isn't that value of human life, but it's also because of the situation they've grown up in. You know, people grow up, I don't think it's normal when they're young, but it slowly gets ingrained in them that, you know, sometimes life is just not that important.
Yeah. And I think society is wounded. Our country has suffered a wound, you know. I'll never forget leaving my house in Dobsonville and there was a big conflict between two guys. The one guy was like literally throwing this boulder of a stone on this human being. And that guy was near death. But the value of life was being retaught, re-educated to say that life is less than. We've got to re-heal that wound because we've got too many people who are carrying that wound, where life can be taken away with ease. And a sense upon which we restore that as a society. And that's about how we fix families, because you learn your values first and foremost in families. And part of doing that is an economic conversation about saying, how do we help parents work, live, play closer to home? Because like, if you think about
how do we support them so that they can be parents?
Yeah. Because if you think about it in other instances, people are leaving home at 6 o'clock to return home at 8 o'clock. Cape Town, for example, you've got a highway that has got a bus lane that goes into town, but no bus lane going out of town, because it matters what time you get to work. It doesn't matter what time you get home. Now, that's a spatial planning issue that needs addressing so that we can make sure parents are closer to home. They're not spending that much amount of time.
I always wondered why there was no bus lane coming out of town.
I still wonder myself.
But there's like half.
You know what I mean? Like, the net consequence of it is parents are getting home late. They are not being able to involve themselves. So who teaches kids values? They end up learning them outside the home. They learn them from drugs. They learn them from gangs. They learn them in spaces that effectively cannot translate those values into what it means. So we've got to fix that. We've got to have leadership that demonstrates that. And we've got to be parliamentary. You know, sometimes when people watch Parliament, and I know I was a part of it, many people would say, but we watched you guys, you know, fight points of order, and there's a lack of respect and a lack of all of those things. We mustn't be surprised when we see a child in a classroom say to their teacher, Niamos, Futsek, we don't want to listen to you, or whatever the case might be. Sorry, I hope that
No, that's fine. You can say whatever you want, yeah.
So I just want to make sure that we have a values conversation that says, how do we strengthen the individual, strengthen their family so that communities are stronger? If we achieve that, we build a nation of strong individuals. But at this point in time, the ecosystem is built in such a way that I think young people in this country face very, very difficult obstacles. And there's so much work and research being done around this about how do we strengthen a child so that they are resilient in our society.
And I want to go back a little bit, because I kind of skipped over everything in the beginning.
No.
But what was your first job?
My first job, actually, I worked at Total Sports selling shoes. I used to work at Total Sports. I had to try and earn some money through school. So yeah, I did that as a job. It was fun.
And I actually know that.
Oh, you do?
I do know that. And I know you're a size 12.
Yes. How do you know?
I've got my ways.
You're in there. You're in there. You're in there. Yeah.
So I've got a present for you.
Oh, you do? I love shoes, man. Man, I love shoes. It comes.
So Reebok a while ago gave me these shoes for Nelson Mandela Day.
Oh,
Right?
yeah?
These aren't your shoes, but I just wanted to show them to you because I wanted to give them to you, but I didn't realize how big your feet were. Because I'm a size 9, right? But they've got like this Nelson Mandela print on it.
love those.
This is not an ad. It's not sponsored or anything.
Yeah.
This is just a gift. I wanted to show you these. So those are the Nelson Mandela shoes.
Those are beautiful, beautiful. I love those.
And these ones are for you.
Thank you.
And these are for your assistants.
She's been snitching.
She's been
Snitching. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
How did you know I love shoes, man? I love shoes.
I just have a feeling you got style, so.
That's my thing.
Yeah, they're really beautiful. They're very similar to the ones I'm wearing.
I could wear them now. Maybe during the show I'll put them on.
Yeah, you can if you want to. I mean, so how did you go from there and end up studying in the universities that you did study?
The first place is, funny enough, I grew up as a Catholic, so I thought I'd be a priest, actually. That's what I thought initially. And then when I finished high school, I took a year off because I was 16 in matric. I turned 17 in that year. I wasn't going to be able to drive. Not that I had money to buy a car, but I thought I'll do a year off. And in that year, felt a deep mission, a deep call to do something significant with my life. And thanks to the community I was working on, it gave me time in that year to volunteer working with young people. And secondly, I was working in a church. And thirdly, one of the things that I started to do is I started to study theology. And so then continued with that, did a master's in theology. And that was, in some ways, that one journey. And whilst I was doing that, I remember being in a local community where I just really had a deep sense that this government isn't turning. We were running an NGO. I was delivering food to communities. We were doing a door-to-door drop-off. And I remember sitting with this woman who was digging a hole in her garden. I said to her, Mama, exactly what are you doing? She said to me, Mtanam, I'm building a toilet. And that felt like a moment that hit me in the gut, because you realize that this was in 2007, 2008. How is it that this woman is building her own toilet? We can do many things, but how can she be building her own toilet? Like at that point, I was living 5 kilometers away down the road. We had 4 toilets. And to arrive and sit in someone's home and them only have one or have none is a crime. And I'd come out of the ANC. So at that point, I was a complete wreck. I said, I'm going to stand as a ward councillor because the ward that this woman was in, well, I'm going to stand there. And I started then a political journey. But I can remember that night, having worked it out, I went and studied a master's in public administration. And I thought I was a Vitsi, so we looked down on other people. No, it's not true. But I can remember thinking to myself, wow, I want to come back and serve here. And I didn't want to be a politician. I actually wanted to be an administrator who could write public policy. And it started a journey. I'll never forget the first lecture I attended in economics, led by Professor Mohammed Jahed, who was an incredible prof, spoke unbelievably, but gave me an inspiration to say through economics we could solve some of that woman's problems. And in the 2016 local government election, when we were able to govern Johannesburg in a coalition government, I can remember saying to the mayors, if you do anything else, please help that woman who still hasn't got a toilet in democratic South Africa.
Amazing. And how did you go from there to politics?
That was the thing, right? When I decided to stand as a ward councillor, it had to be a political move. Okay. You can't do it any other way. It had to be that. And, others would say that maybe politics isn't the thing. That's a fair argument. But I don't, there's some things about politics I don't enjoy, to be fair enough. just don't like the mess. I don't like some of the intra competition.
I don't think anyone really loves politics, but I think they love what you can do with
Sure.
that power.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
and the change you can make.
Sure. I think you can do a lot. I certainly think that politics is far too important to be left up to politicians. So that statement remains true. But I've given my own roots. My grandmother was a staunch Catholic. She taught us the value of service, you know. And if I can do anything, if I can do anything, it's just to live up to a legacy of being able to go, how can you serve? Right.
And I mean, so you were the leader of the DA. Can you tell me why you left and what were some of the internal conflicts that were going on that kind of made you leave?
Yeah. You know, I can remember it must have been just soon after the elections, we had a young woman who was murdered in a post office not far from my house.
Unene?
Yeah, Uyinene. And
Uyinene.
I can remember attending the gender-based violence march that took place. I stood in that march outside Parliament as a member of Parliament, and I tried to lay low. I was there with my wife, and I remember the president speaking, and I remember him trying to ramp up the crowd on this issue of GBV. And it struck me when I was walking away from that discussion that that Parliament wasn't talking to the people and the people were suffering. And I remember walking with the president. I went and spoke to him. I said, Mr. President, you know, what is happening here is a whole bunch of citizens who, the next time they come back, there will be no army big enough to defend against
The people, yeah.
against the people. And I think he kind of heard that. But right then, I knew that politics just wasn't, and parliamentary politics just wasn't working for citizens. It just wasn't. So it sowed a lot of doubt in me about the system as it's configured. And I know you might say, but you're going back in the system. It's always to change the system, because sometimes, as others say, it's not broken, it's working for someone. Then when I looked at our political parties at the time inside the DA, I always pursued a vision of all South Africans. And I felt that the political system was set up in such a way that you had black parties, you had white parties, and then you had regional parties, or regional religious, that kind of grouping. The debate wasn't always about ideas and contestation. Was it whether you're a white party or a black party? And I worked hard inside the DA to say, we've got to have a vision broader than just saying we are attracting this constituents. We've got to go talk to all South Africans. And that means we're going to have to pay the price for it. And it became a fight because there were others inside the organization that say, but the others will never vote for us. I said, well, yes, we might have lost some votes in 2019, maybe to the Freedom Front Plus, but it's important that we keep fighting for all South Africans. And others were like, no, we'll just stick to that. And I just knew I wasn't going to fight internally.
You couldn't do what you wanted to do there.
No.
And I saw on the Mac G podcast that, because I think he said that, I mean, why didn't you do it when you were in the DA?
Yeah.
I don't think that necessarily has anything to do with it, because we all know that each party has their own set of values, and it's not just you at the top that can make the decisions, you know? So by moving and starting your own party, you might have more control, and there might be people in there that have the same vision as you and not conflicting visions.
Correct. And I knew I didn't want to spend time with conflicting visions, because that not only does it dissuade voters, it also slows you down. So now the vision for building one South Africa is something that I fought for even inside the DA. And I will continue to fight it outside the DA. Because if it was rejected inside the DA, it doesn't mean it must be rejected by the people of this country. So we've got to do what we need to do and build an organization that works for all South Africans. I pride myself at being able to go, I can work with black people, white people, Indian people, colored people, and together we can make this country work. I don't buy the idea that you need to have black parties and white parties. It's just crap.
And in terms of Build One South Africa, it's Bosa, eh? Bosa.
Bosa Gima.
What are, in short, what are your core values? What are the things you guys want to strive for?
We want to build a country built around the value of Ubuntu, the idea of justice, and being future focused, right? So along those three values, we've articulated policies that say, can we attend to the economy? Can we fix our education system? Can we keep people safe? Can we ensure that together we have a health system that if someone goes to the doctor, they can get to the clinic, they can get help, and an effective government? So on that, we can kind of build values. We have a vision for this country, and ultimately we think that we will be able to modernize the South African economy to be able to deliver against those things.
How can you start a new party and expect to become president after all of the things the current government has put the people through? What else can they do to lose trust and favor with the country? Because they've done so much, but people still vote them in.
I think the idea of one-party dominance has come and gone. I think we're going to build a coalition government in 2024, and I know people are worried about how that will change, but I want to say to them, don't worry. Things change. They need to change. That's the first. The second thing is, I think that to your point, I think when the lights go off, when people don't feel safe, the government is losing credibility. Now, we don't want for things to get worse. I think we've got a lot to lose as a country. But I know for a fact South Africans are looking for an alternative. And we are that alternative. I really believe we can build it. I really believe we can deliver against it. And more than anything, I think that we know we're not going to sit here and win 100% of the vote. No one ever does that. But we want to be able to be significant to build a coalition in 2024 that will bring the best in each party and be able to deliver a vision for South Africa.
And where does corruption stem from in South Africa? Where do you think, because there's obviously corruption everywhere, and there's corruption on many different levels, but it just feels like in South Africa, it's getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
Where did it start?
In many ways, when a society is wounded, right, and has lost its values, then its leaders, if they don't seek to fix those values, believe that running the state is a side hustle, actually being rich is the issue. Corruption starts when a father sits outside, eats KFC, and then comes inside the house and says, hey, children, we are all hungry. We have nothing to eat. But the kids could see them through the window. And that's what state capture is. State capture is our political leaders eating when people don't have health facilities, etc. So what we've got to do is, in the last number of years, and I would say about 10, 15 years, we've hollowed out the state and made it impossible to fight against corruption. I think corruption is a universal problem, right?
Yeah, of course.
It doesn't matter which country you go to. The only difference is when corruption takes place in other places, you become prosecuted, you can become arrested quite quickly.
But it's like carte blanche here. You can just, it seems like you just do it
here,
almost.
The institutions have so failed that the corruption we know about sometimes is a drop in the ocean because there's other micro acts of corruption. It's
so small that they fly under the radar.
The radar.
But it is happening,
sure,
yeah. And over time, it can be a huge impact.
Yeah, it's in the private sector when you see big companies fail. It's in the things like the Steinhoff issue, but it's also in the small areas when we drive and the policeman stops you and then suddenly you're like, can I buy you a cool drink? It's all of those acts. Society is broken because we don't have transparency on one level. And secondly, it's typically what's called exclusivity of service. So if both you and I were looking for these shoes and the only place we could get them was from the one guy, and that one guy could decide, believe you me,
he's going to take as much as
you know what I mean? That one guy is going to eventually be like, no, for you it'll be like another $100. For you it'll be 2,000, whatever, because they are the monopoly. And sometimes you think about some of the corruption that occurs in places like the Home Affairs or whatever. They occur because people don't have another alternative. And then you build an incentive for the officials to go, actually, I can set up a side hustle here where I can earn more money by making sure the lines become longer at Home Affairs and services are not democratized.
And I don't know if you would answer this question, but who do you think the main culprits are?
I think it's a political leadership that have captured the state, that have ultimately... Hey, this is the dilemma of the great Republic of South Africa. Now the lights are off.
Load shedding.
But are you still recording?
Yeah. We're still going. The generator should come back on now.
Oh, okay. There we go. I'll hold my globe, and now we do it in stage 8 load shedding.
Is that what it is now? Stage 8?
No, it's stage 4. Stage 8 is when they come and they switch off your candles.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about this.
No problem. I get it.
I mean, I guess it's a good way to go into load shedding.
That's the dilemma, right?
So when it comes to load shedding, well, I mean, what do you plan on doing about load shedding?
Yeah, we've got a 2, 5-year, and a 10-year plan. So in the immediate 2 years, we are in the Mmusi gate, so we don't have a choice. We have to fix it by making sure that we can introduce a diversity of energy sources. We can't be precious about Eskom. What we've got to do is make sure that we build independent power suppliers, diversify energy, incentivize. There's a new program that allows us to set up a stock exchange where we could really buy and sell energy and contribute to the grid. On a 5-year plan, I think we've got to be saying to ourselves, how do we integrate regionally so that we can benefit from other things like gas, etc., so that we can keep a much stronger grid and make sure energy is workable. And then on a 10-year plan, how do we environmentally, sustainably make sure municipalities are also able to procure their energy space, but diversify the energy, and individual citizens are able to sell back into the grid. So there's multiple programs that go over 2-5 years. And I think that given the leadership that we would have, give us 2 years, we should be able to fix energy.
And when it comes to your load shedding routine, because this is something, I live in a flat by myself, and I don't have any lights or anything there, and I don't have like a backup generator there.
Yeah.
So when it comes to your routine, you get home from work, the power's going off. What do you do?
It's been painful, hey, because I won't lie to you. I'm a father of 3 kids, and we've got a 2-year-old. You try and warm up a bottle when there's no energy, it's the worst. So we try and plan around it. My wife is quite good about doing certain things, and I try and train in a time where load shedding is work. Where it affects me the most is that, sure, you might have some battery things that help you keep some things going. But when it affects me the most is in the morning, because I do a lot of work. I get up early. I'm up every morning at least at 5 o'clock, and I do work before 7. So those 2 hours, when there's load shedding, that's 2 hours in my day I can't recover, and that's the worst. You get like load shedding gets under my blood. It annoys me beyond words.
It's not even annoying. It's depressing. It's incredibly depressing because it ruins the country financially. I'm sure it has huge impacts. Oh. Okay, there we go.
Stage 3, we are down to now.
It's got a switch on the side.
I've got to try and find it. There we go.
Press it again and again. That's
Disco.
it. I mean, how do you think it impacts the country emotionally?
I think that, well, we can measure that, right? Like, I think citizens are immigrating. So you can see that people have taken their escape route where they go, we can't put up with this. Because it puts... Just think about someone who battles with anxiety or has been through trauma or violence. They are sitting at home at some point in the dark, worrying all the time. I think it affects the kid who's trying to write a matric exam, who's thinking, how do I study in the dark knowing I've got a test tomorrow? When I was writing matric exams, it was some of the most stressful time, but I didn't have to worry about the lack of energy along with that, which meant I couldn't study. So I just think we can see the mood of the country become one of absolute misery when load shedding is on. And I think that we've undercounted how profound an impact load shedding is having on people.
No, I mean, I feel it myself. And, I live in a relatively privileged life. I have the things that I need. But imagine someone that doesn't have those things, and now it's just like something else, something small. That one light in their shack has been taken away from them.
And you know what's the other thing that's also worse is that people just give up the belief that things can get better. Now, that's one of the hardest things we've got to have to overcome, because I want to say to South Africans, this country can be better. We can't give up on it, because when you go to rural communities, some people tell you, no, here we don't have load shedding. We just don't know when we'll have electricity again. Now, that's not the country. That's a country we don't want to live in. So I think we must invite people. And there are solutions to these things, right? Like, there are real solutions. There mustn't just be solutions for the wealthy. There must be solutions for everybody. And I think, we forget, when the lights go off, cell phones also stop working, which means someone can't make connection with other people. So let's fix it.
I mean,
Let's fix it.
the lights went off outside the building I stay at, and someone got robbed, and the cameras couldn't see her, the
Yeah.
security couldn't help.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of different things that I think we don't think about. I mean,
Yeah.
but coming towards the end, I want to ask you something. How do you feel about Jacob Zuma?
Jacob Zuma, for me, one, I'm sad by what he represents. He represents, in many ways, what used to worry me when I was overseas, and people would be like, that's your president, that's who represents you. He's allayed a criminal syndicate to rob this country. He's put shame on me as a black South African to say, that's the best we can do. And I think more than anything, regardless of whether I think what's happening to him now is right or wrong, I think, to me, President Jacob Zuma has sold our country out and has had profound reputational damage to our nation, and certainly to me as a South African.
And I mean, I watched your SANA debate in 2015. I didn't watch it in 2015. I watched it yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what you said was incredible, you know, how you started it off. And I think a lot of people, especially I would be very scared to say something like that to someone's face. But I think it needed to be said.
The broken man speech?
Do you remember what you said?
Yeah.
I've got it. Do you want me to read it?
Please do.
So, excuse my reading. So you said, we have indeed allowed one powerful man to get away with too much for far too long. Members, this honorable man is in our presence here today. Honorable President, in these very chambers, just 5 days ago, you broke Parliament. Please understand, Honorable President, when I use the term honorable, I do it out of traditions and conventions of this august house. But please don't take it literally, for you, Honorable President, are not an honorable man.
No. And given what has been going on, you cannot deny that he not only broke Parliament, he broke our country. Jacob Zuma allowed a parallel state to occur that will take us a decade to recover from. And so I think for that reason alone, I have no regard for him. He's and at the time you might say it's oppositional politics, but even now sitting here today, I get angry by the profound impact President Zuma has had on this country. But not alone.
Of course not.
I think we must never forget the fact that when I also said to Mr. Zuma, we don't have a Jacob Zuma problem, we have an ANC problem. I think sometimes we mustn't forget that there was an ANC before Mr. Zuma that was actually governing well, that was making things improve for people, that was building more houses than there were shacks, GDP growth was high. And then in the Zuma era, almost all of that was reversed, that literally economic growth and activity and participation for people stalled. So he set us back so profoundly that now when I talk about building, it's no doubt the fact that we've got to almost rebuild and build afresh. And much of it has been the absence of progress under his leadership. Let me give you just one simple stat. If South Africa had grown at the same rate as its peer countries, so these are countries in the same levels as ours. I'm not comparing us to Germany and whatever. I'm just looking at countries in our peer. Turkey, some ways Brazil, some of those countries. We would have had 23 million people employed as opposed to the 14 we have now. So the opportunity cost has been all of those jobs that have been lost. That's Jacob Zuma.
He was also very linked to the Guptas, which I think they had a huge impact on why we have such bad load shedding now.
Undeniably, but...
Because weren't they selling coal to Eskom at like 10 times the price of coal or something?
The system was set up. From that point on, you created an ecosystem that was able to capture the president who had captured a party, and they were able to do so. I think we can read about the Guptas, and yes, they should be arrested, locked up, all of the above. But we mustn't also forget that there's state capture happening in municipalities. That's like if you go to municipalities today, there are people building stadiums that are like millions and millions of rands, but they look like chicken sheds. You wonder how? How does this happen? So I think we must not forget that we've seen a government become eroded to a point now that literally infrastructure build is going to be the next headache in this country, because ESCOM is an infrastructural issue. But I can promise you now, here in Cape Town, rail has become almost destroyed. We got to talk about rail infrastructure and how we build it, because it's necessary for the economy. Imagine now, while fuel cost is going up for many people, imagine if we had an effective train station. If you leave here to try and get to town, it takes too long, right? Bus systems, all of those things, infrastructure, bridges in Johannesburg. All of this has been eroded. So we need to build this country. And I'm afraid Jacob Zuma has set us back, not only financially, etc., but the ANC collectively needs to take accountability for this issue.
Yeah, and I mean, like you were saying, it's not just him. He's the head, or at the time he was the head.
Yeah.
But when you chop the head off, another one replaces it.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can replace it.
And that's where I think we mustn't just forget that this is a governance problem, because there are people who supported Jacob Zuma.
Amazing. Well, it's been awesome speaking to you.
My brother, it's been a privilege.
I know you've got a country to take care of, so I'm going to let you go. But thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been amazing.
My great privilege any day. Love the shoes. I'm gonna put them on and I'm gonna rock them out this afternoon. So
amazing.
I'm gonna tag you in the post on Insta, and then I'm looking.
You're gonna look fly.
Fly, as they say. No. So thank you, my brother. It's been a great privilege, and I wish you well. I love when the guys told me about the podcast today. I just thought, wow, it's a great privilege to be invited. So thank you, and thank you for what you're doing. Let's keep talking. We can build.
Amazing. And thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Wide Awake podcast, and I'll see you all very soon. Cheers.
Moja.